It really cannot be overstated just how much the early development of Coventry is owed to the most famous couple ever to be associated with the town. A man who was one of the three most powerful men in the country required a lady with substance, wealth and high status. A lady who on one hand is obedient to her husband, yet boldly challenges his position on political issues. In this film, we now look at the fascinating story of Lady Godiva. Godiva was a late Anglo-Saxon noblewoman. Her Old English name of Godiva or Godiva meant the gift of God, and Godiva was the Latinised form. She had been well documented over the years as the wife to Leofric, the Earl of Mercia, and the couple had 9 children. They were also patrons to many churches and monasteries. Godiva's first appearance in the history books occurs in charters and the Domesday Survey. In 1043, a royal charter by Edward the Confessor, now known to be a forgery, states that Leofric and Godiva founded a Benedictine monastery for 24 monks. This was later to become the Priory and Cathedral of St Mary's, and although not original, there is no reason to fully doubt the charter's contents. Questions will always be asked about authenticity of such documents, and cases where in the later years that someone with an interest in their own power and status might amend the original document. For example, to forge a claim to land or property which does not belong to them. In other situations, this could also be simply construed as a way to replace a lost document to reinforce their own claim. Whatever, at the time of writing, the person felt justified in their actions, and we are left with no knowledge as to how truthful the statement is. With regards to St Mary's, excavations have unearthed many features of Coventry's first cathedral, but it still leaves much speculation about exactly what it looked like. The cathedral may have been in existence by 1022, when a Coventry church was presented with the arm of St Augustine, and if this is true, then Leofric and Godiva's contribution may have been to endow the monastery and not actually found it. Many riches were bestowed upon the church, and William of Malmesbury, who was the foremost English historian of the 12th century, was recorded saying, "It was enriched and beautified with so much gold and silver that the walls seemed to narrow to contain it." Godiva herself has been mentioned in many articles over the years with her name spelt in differing ways. However, if she is the same Godiva who appears in the history of Ely Abbey, the Liber Eliensis, written at the end of the 12th century, then she was a widow when Leofric married her. The Liber Eliensis was composed in 3 books and written at Ely Abbey on the island of Ely in the fenlands of eastern Cambridgeshire. A 12th century English chronicle and history written in Latin. Traditionally, the author of the anonymous work has been given as Richard or Thomas, 2 monks associated at the time. And the book covers the period from the founding of the abbey in 673 until the middle of the 12th century, building on earlier historical works. It is said both Leofric and Godiva were generous benefactors to religious houses. In 1043, Leofric founded and endowed a Benedictine monastery at Coventry on the site of a nunnery destroyed by the Danes in 1016. Writing in the 12th century, Roger of Wendover credits Godiva as the persuasive force behind this act. In the 1050s, her name is coupled with that of her husband on a grant of land to the monastery of St Mary in Worcester and the endowment of the minster at Stowe St Mary, Lincolnshire. She and her husband are commemorated as benefactors of other monasteries at Leominster, Chester, Much Wenlock and Evesham. Although Lady Godiva and her husband were among the most charitable of the several large Anglo-Saxon donors of the last decades before the Norman conquest, including a number of works in precious metal by the famous goldsmith Manig, One such item was a necklace valued at 100 marks of silver. The mark was used as a coinage weight in the 11th century and replaced the pound weight as a precious metal. Another necklace went to Evesham to be hung around the figure of the Virgin, accompanying the life-size gold and silver crucifix she and her husband gave. But the early Norman bishops made short work of their gifts, carrying them off to Normandy or melting them down for bullion. It was, however, a legend that has passed the sands of time and still resonates to this day, that has continued to keep the name of Lady Godiva alive for centuries. The story goes that Lady Godiva took pity on the people of Coventry, who were suffering grievously under her husband's oppressive taxation. She appealed again and again to her husband, who obstinately refused to remit the tolls. At last, weary of her entreaties, he said he would grant her request if she would strip naked and ride on a horse through the streets of the town. Lady Godiva took him at his word, and after issuing a proclamation that all persons should stay indoors and shut their windows, she rode through the town clothed only in her long hair. If there is one thing that history has told us over the years, it is not to believe everything you read. The legend of the nude ride is first recorded in the 13th century in the Flores Historiarum, or Flowers of History, and the adaptation of it by Roger of Wendover, who was an English chronicler of the 13th century. Yet despite its considerable age, it is not regarded as plausible by modern historians, nor is it mentioned in the 2 centuries intervening between Godiva's death and its first appearance, while her generous donations to the church receive various mentions. There may be some truth to the fact of her ride through the streets, but this could also be construed as one of a pagan fertility ritual, whereby a young May Queen was led to the sacred Cophos tree, perhaps to celebrate the renewal of spring. The oldest form of the legend has Godiva passing through Coventry Market from one end to the other while the people were assembled, attended only by 2 knights, a version given in the Flowers of History, noted as being somewhat of a gullible account. In a chronicle written in the 1560s, Richard Grafton claimed the version given in the book originated from a lost chronicle written between 1216 and 1235 by the prior to the monastery of Coventry. Other attempts to find a more plausible rationale for the legend include one based on the custom at the time for penitents to make a public procession, a sleeveless white garment similar to a slip today, and one which was certainly considered underwear. Thus, Godiva might have actually travelled through the town as a penance, showing sorrow and regret for having done wrong. One of the myth's most interesting subplots involves the role of Peeping Tom, who doesn't even appear in the story until the 17th century. According to legend, the people of Coventry, as a gesture of respect and appreciation for Lady Godiva's actions on their behalf, stayed indoors behind shuttered windows to preserve her modesty as she passed. Everyone, that is, except Tom, whose lustful curiosity compelled him to gaze at her, and who was then, according to various versions of the legend, struck either blind or dead in punishment. Over time, Tom would become the scapegoat and bear the symbolic guilt for people's desire to look at this naked woman. Given the sexual tension that the appearance of Tom creates between the observer and the observed, the prurient and the chaste, the punished and the rewarded, only in recent years has Peeping Tom become extricated from the Godiva legend to the extent that it is possible to mention one without calling to mind the other. Peeping Tom is certainly a myth, but it adds another side to the story, created as a folklore and a word still used in modern day language to someone as a peeping Tom, meaning that they secretly watch other people, especially when those people are taking their clothes off. After Leofric's death in 1057, his widow lived on until some time between the Norman conquest of 1066 and 1086. She is mentioned in the Domesday Survey as one of the few Anglo-Saxons and the only woman to remain a major landholder shortly after the conquest. By the time of this great survey in 1086, Godiva had died, but her former lands are listed, although now held by others. The place where Godiva was buried has been a matter of debate. According to the Evesham Chronicle, she was buried at the Church of the Blessed Trinity at Evesham, which is no longer standing. According to the account in the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, there is no reason to doubt that she was buried with her husband at Coventry, despite the assertion of the Evesham Chronicle that she lay in Holy Trinity, Evesham. Her husband was buried in St Mary's Priory and Cathedral in 1057. The Godiva myth is filled with contradictions. The lady is obedient to her husband, yet boldly challenges his position on taxes. She rides naked through the streets of the city, yet remains a maiden. She is a member of the ruling class who nonetheless sympathises with the plight of ordinary people. Unlike other myths, this one offers ways to resolve, symbolically at least, such conflicting social and sexual dynamics. Mark Twain once said, "Perhaps it is just a matter of time before some new Godiva will coax the current Earls of Mercia and bring about the perfection to usher in a greater era of understanding, compassion and tolerance, with liberty and justice for all, to accompany our scientific progress." And with this outcome, it is something without doubt that we can all deem it worth waiting for.